Can
you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Initially, I tried to call in with my phone line because of the spotty connection, but I think that was the issue. But
Oh, well, I'm glad you are on board. We have a number of people online. And again, this is Rodrick Miller. He's the CEO of Invest Puerto Rico. Welcome. We have these daily webinars as a way to connect and learn about what's going out in our universe. So tell me a little bit about yourself, and then tell me a little bit about Invest Puerto Rico.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always exciting to share the story of Puerto Rico and kind of the great things that are happening here on the island, the story of resilience and the opportunities that abound. I've been in economic development for about 20 years now, originally from South Carolina. But in other roles, I led the economic recovery of New Orleans a few years after Hurricane Katrina. I set up the Economic Development Agency there and ran that for about 4 years. And after that, I went to Detroit, where I led their Economic Development Agency for about 2.5 years before launching my own firm. And now I'm here in Puerto Rico, but I've really built my career off of going places where there were questions around kind of the viability of these economies. But what we've always been able to uncover is that there is an untapped, not just potential, but there is a market perspective that these economies are actually better positioned to pivot and to respond to the new economy that's emerging worldwide. Here at Invest Puerto Rico, our mission is very simple. Our job is to bring new jobs and investment to the island of Puerto Rico. So we promote Puerto Rico as a targeted destination for investment and for job creation. And we were established as an organization in 2017 via law. And we were set up essentially as a public-private partnership, but a nonprofit, specifically to provide continuity in terms of the economic development strategy for the island. What we know is that historically, the economic development has changed. The leadership has changed with every new gubernatorial administration. So Invest Puerto Rico aims to provide consistency in terms of the marketing messages and in terms of the strategy, and also aims to provide really a private sector approach to really a public performing function.
Okay. So for the average person, right, they're thinking, and maybe this is a good time, we're all having a lot of time to consider, what do we do next, right? What does our life look like beyond this pandemic? So Puerto Rico, tell me what the opportunities, some of the opportunities are.
So Puerto Rico, and I'm going to assume that there's not necessarily a high level of knowledge about Puerto Rico. And so I'll provide a little context and then try to answer that question more directly. I mean, Puerto Rico is positioned in the heart of the Caribbean. You know, it's very Latin, but it's also very Caribbean, and it's also very American. And as a result of that, the economy reflects that diversity of opportunity in the way it's functioned. About 48% of the economy is manufacturing, but we've also got strong professional services, IT, software, those sorts of things. At Invest Puerto Rico, we look at our work in 3 general buckets. Bucket number 1 is we try to figure out, how do we actually shift the narrative about Puerto Rico? The Puerto Rican narrative has been shifted largely by current events and media that doesn't necessarily understand all the nuances. So the Puerto Rican narrative, unfortunately, has been financial crisis, has been hurricanes, now earthquakes, and of course now COVID-19. That's been the narrative, but the narrative is actually much, much richer. The narrative should be around the diversity of the population, around the diversification of the businesses that are on the island, and that the value that's here. And that's what we're really trying to shift it to. So the part 1 is we want to shift the narrative through our marketing communications. Part 2 of what we really look to do is that we try to leverage data effectively to make the case for Puerto Rico. When a company is considering expanding to an island or expanding anywhere, there are a whole variety of factors that they look at in terms of the caliber of the workforce, fiscal policy, so on and so forth. And historically, Puerto Rico hasn't provided clarity of access to that information. So, so we tried to provide the data sets and the information needed so that companies can make good decisions. And we also do that in the spirit of increasing the competitiveness of the island. And what do I mean by that? From a competitive perspective, you've got $1, you're going to either spend it here or you're going to spend it there. What we want to show is that $1 spent in Puerto Rico goes further than $1 somewhere else. It's more productive, it's more innovative. And we do that by focusing on fixing foundational issues in the Puerto Rican economy that make it easier to do business. And then the last thing that we do is, of course, is the core business development. So we try to create relationships with decision makers, C-suite executives, corporate real estate executives, those sorts of people that are making these decisions to say, you should come to Puerto Rico. We've got a population that is that knows how to work, that is highly educated, that's bilingual. We've got strong incentives. We've got access to the Americas and Europe through direct flight. Those are the kinds of things that we try to sell, and we develop that relationship, and we not only help those companies identify the value in Puerto Rico, but we help them to have a soft landing and navigate the process of locating on the island.
So, Rodrick, do you mostly work with small to medium-sized businesses, or are you also looking at small entrepreneurs?
So our work is primarily with small and medium-sized businesses, but we work with everyone. Our mission is our work is very simple. When you look at existing businesses that are on the island, the Department of Economic Development and Commerce, DDEC, they really are the group that focuses on businesses that are already here. Our goal is to bring new businesses here in all kinds of forms. And so while we don't provide coaching and mentoring and a lot of those kind of support services for entrepreneurs, we do help them move to the island. We help all new businesses get set up on the island, and we have a whole network of partners that we work with that provide actually more direct entrepreneurial services.
Super. So let me ask you this. You said that 48% of the folks that are in the island are manufacturing, right?
Yeah.
How about and then you said a large percentage is IT. How about this new form of doing business, which is more remote than not? How does that look like for Puerto Rico?
You know, that's a great question. So one of the things, and I hope this context is helpful, what we did is in December, we wrote out our promotional strategy for how we were going to promote the island. And what we determined from a business development perspective, about 60% of our focus would be on what we call knowledge services. Knowledge services are IT and software, professional services, like lawyers, you know, those sorts of things, financial services, creative industries, business services, those sorts of things where we said we would focus 60% of our work and specifically going out to sell to those companies, selling to those companies and being aggressive. We would spend about 30% of our time on what would be considered kind of the foundational historic sectors, things like logistics and manufacturing. And we would spend 10% of our time monitoring what we would consider to be disruptive opportunities. Those would be things like major trade policy, artificial intelligence, or things like COVID-19, you know, which had the potential to dramatically shift and change our world. And so what we found, you know, COVID-19 has done that. It has dramatically shifted our world. And as part of our strategy, we said, you know, we thought that Puerto Rico would be great for, would be a great place for workers who would want to work remotely. Well, our pivot for COVID-19 has pretty much 4 pillars, and remote work is part of them. The 4 pillars is, number one, we want to underscore the message of the island's resilience throughout everything we do. Whereas the rest of the world is really in pandemonium right now, Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans are like, wow, this is another hit. But everybody pretty much say, okay, how do we continue to keep things moving forward? And what that's translated for companies that are here is a level of productivity and response time, even in times of challenge that they don't experience in other markets. So number one is we want to focus on this message of resilience. The second pillar of this strategy that we've identified is, hey, yeah, these sectors that we've highlighted, you know, in terms of knowledge services, they're largely dependent on computers and people. And what does that mean? That means that they can make a decision about an investment or expanding relatively quickly. they're pretty much content is pretty much moving people and moving computers. So it's not infrastructure intensive. So so Puerto Rico having some of the infrastructure challenges that it has, these kinds of businesses can continue to thrive and flourish in Puerto Rico. But the third pillar, which gets to your point, is to position Puerto Rico as an optimal remote work location. What we know, and I've been talking to CEOs around the country, and they've all said similar things, which is that by and large, their workforce continues, the ones that work remotely, they continue to be productive. Why? Because people recognize that we're in a crisis on a global scale right now. People are grateful to have a job, and people are showing, hey, I can be just as productive, if not more, at home. We think that trend's going to continue. And we believe that, take a day in the life of a computer programmer. Would you rather be a computer programmer in Boston, New York, Silicon Valley, or Puerto Rico? Well, your dollar goes further, the weather's better, and you've got access to the globe, and you're doing it in a culture that's thriving and in an environment that's thriving. So we're hunkering down. We're both going directly to companies that have large remote working populations to sell to those companies directly to say, you know what would it do for you to encourage your remote working population to consider Puerto Rico? What kind of relationship can we have? As well as we are going to be launching this next fiscal year, a talent program which focuses on figuring out how do we bring high impact, high productivity human capital to the island. That's both in terms of the diaspora, as well as in terms of a lot of those knowledge workers. And then I guess the last point that I would underscore as part of our strategy is that we do think we should be positioning Puerto Rico as a solution to the national security concerns related to the pharmaceutical supply chain. As I mentioned, 48% of the economy is manufacturing, and about half of that 48% is specifically in the pharmaceutical sector. So as companies start to move away from China as a location because of these security concerns, Puerto Rico is well positioned to capture that.
That's it. That's pretty exciting, I think, right?
It's very exciting. It's very exciting.
So you and I have had a conversation about Puerto Rico and my interest in moving to Puerto Rico and starting something there. So what do you recommend to entrepreneurs that are considering opening a business in Puerto Rico?
Well, one of the things, that we haven't talked about, and the reason why, I didn't lead with this, and in many cases, this does lead a lot of the conversation when people ask locally, like, why should a company come to Puerto Rico? The first thing people say, oh, they've got these great incentives.
Right.
Now, the reality is Puerto Rico's incentives are the best of anywhere that I've ever seen in terms of protecting income that an entrepreneur earns in their business. And protecting the income of an individual. So part of what I would tell someone that was considering coming here is, yes, our incentives are world-class, but what I think would be more important for an entrepreneur to know, or equally as important, is that you've got a level of unprecedented access. It is an island, and one of the things, I've started calling it Startup Island, hopefully it'll catch on, but one of the things that I've said, capital that's on the island, key decision makers and major corporations, they can try to hide if they want to, they don't want to. But realistically, because it's an island, there's a level of access that entrepreneurs don't find in other markets that may be more developed and a little bit older. So not only are there great incentives, there's access to potential clients, there's access to human capital, there's also access to funding. And those are the sorts of things that I think, entrepreneurs really need to know. And then the last point I would mention is that people often wonder, can I get the workforce that I need in Puerto Rico? And you're a prime example, but there are many others. When I look at the talent that leaves Puerto Rico, we've gone from 3.8 million people to 3.2 million people in the last 10 years. And many of those people left because there weren't the types of opportunities here. So of course, we're working diligently to change that. But what that also tells me is that for the entrepreneur that's coming here and trying to find talent, it's here in droves. They just have to know how to find it. And we're actually developing platform systems, relationships to help connect businesses to the talent that they need.
I love that. When you're talking about the IT world, right, and how the infrastructure is not necessarily there as it should be, what comes to my mind immediately is the Amazon Web Services, right? for small businesses, really, actually small to medium-sized businesses, they can build a whole company and not have to have the computers, not have to have the servers, because not that I'm, they're not a sponsor, okay? But I think about that in terms of growing a business. They're a great example of a company that should be focused on Puerto Rico.
Absolutely. I mean, they're a great example. And so we've got a hit list of companies of about 10 to 15 companies that are kind of global brand names that we think should be on the island. And we're aggressively going after them because what I think we offer is we are part of the United States. So we offer that stability of a US jurisdiction, but we also offer a level of access to Latin America and the Caribbean that's hard to come by in the state. Also a level of savviness about how business is done in those markets. So we're finding, that there are these global powerhouses that have presence around the world, but they don't yet have a strong foothold in the Caribbean or a strong foothold in Puerto Rico. And we're cultivating those relationships because we believe they can be wildly even more successful here.
No, I totally agree. I love Puerto Rico. I mean, I was born there. I want to go back there. My parents are there. I have a special love for Puerto Rico. And I think that people that go there just, there's this kinship. But you're right. We are part of the US. We are bilingual. We're highly educated. I mean, what's
Well,
it like?
Yeah, my joke is that anybody can be Puerto Rican.
Yes, absolutely.
And by that, I mean, part of what I found living here on the island is that there are a significant number of business leaders who are from the mainland US, who don't speak Spanish well, but have managed to have incredibly successful careers here. On the flip side of that, I have also noticed very senior business leaders that are either Puerto Rican or from somewhere else in Latin America that don't speak English well, but have managed to have incredibly successful careers here. And the other thing that I would say about, this Puerto Rican, phenomenon is that when I took this job about a year ago, I started in March of 2019, I was contacted by Puerto Ricans from around the globe, from places as far away as Singapore, honestly, Switzerland, all over the US. And they all said, we'd love to come back to Puerto Rico if there were the right opportunity. Or they said, you know what, I've been away for a long time, but it's my home. How can I get involved? So one of the things that we've done is, we've created councils in both New York as well as Silicon Valley. And those are going to be launching officially in the next couple of months. But these councils are comprised of senior business leaders in those markets because I believe that there's enough deal flow out of the Northeast region and out of the California region to kind of support, to help Puerto Rico's economy grow the way that it needs to. And many of the business leaders that have joined those councils have Puerto Rican roots. And so that's been really exciting to engage with the Puerto Rican diaspora and see all of the value that they can bring in helping us craft our value proposition more, as well as their ability to sell Puerto Rico from within the companies that they work in.
A few years ago, this woman by the name of Christine Cruz, she wrote a piece, she did a research paper on why Puerto Ricans, whether they were second generation born, they still had that dream of returning back to the island. To your point.
No, they absolutely have that dream of returning back to the island. Well, it's funny because I talk and many of my friends who are Puerto Rican, or my friends who are of Puerto Rican descent, or my friends who are Puerto Rican who have moved to the mainland, they say they feel more Puerto Rican once they leave because they're able to recognize the uniqueness not only of the culture and community, but they're able to recognize it in a way that they hadn't before. And part of what we have to sell as part of our value proposition isn't just that it's an alternative that's less expensive to the U.S. than the U.S., but we have to sell this reality that that same level of creativity that we find in Puerto Rican music, that we find in Puerto Rican food, that we find in Puerto Rican art, it ultimately means innovation in business. And we have numerous examples, both on the island as well as around the globe, of the value that the Puerto Rican workforce can bring. And so we're trying to figure out how do we actually package that in a way to sell it appropriately to bring more companies here.
Right, because I think a lot of folks are still focused on what I call, or I've heard a few people call flag, food, and fun when they talk about a particular group of people, or in this case, Puerto Ricans, right? But the innovation, the creativity, the resilience, that should be the narrative. That should.
That absolutely should be the narrative, because it's about at the end of the day, I'll put it in two ways. I won't say never, but I've rarely lost a transaction because I couldn't make the numbers work. You find creative ways to make the numbers work so that the project makes sense and move forward in a place. Where I've lost deals is ultimately someone says that they don't want to live there. So I don't want to downplay the flag, food, and fun, because ultimately that is the thing that a CEO's wife or a CEO's husband says, oh, I can imagine myself living there. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, that's not enough to get me to move there on its own. I need to know that there is a reason, there's going to be return on my investment from a business perspective that's going to make more sense from Puerto Rico than somewhere else. And that's the story we haven't told well. We haven't done a good job of telling the story of Wovenware, a Puerto Rican company that's in the artificial intelligence software space that's doing amazing things. We haven't done a good job of talking about University of Puerto Rico, MyOS, and the caliber of engineering coming out of that school, and how they have hundreds of engineers at NASA. We haven't done a good job of talking about the Puerto Rican diaspora and the leadership positions that they hold in global firms. These are the things that actually translate to dollars to the bottom line for companies. And so we've got to capture that and tell that story better.
And so how do you think you can tell that story better?
Well, part of it is, I would argue, and there are some that would disagree, but I would argue at least in the last 30 years, there hasn't been a consistent storyteller. If we go back to 1996, ever since 1996, every 4 years, there's been a new gubernatorial administration, which has meant a complete change in the leadership at the Department of Commerce. So one is, there hasn't been consistency in telling the story. And so, I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. And our team, we're building up a team of people who are experts in this. Our chief of marketing, spent 16 years at JetBlue, where he led a lot of their Latin American marketing issues. Our head of business development comes, from a 30-year career in business development. And so for economic development. So we're bringing in a team of people who have done this their entire careers in terms of figuring out how to tell these stories effectively. That's number one. Number two is, we aim to provide consistent information. Part of the challenge in telling a story is, you can tell a good narrative all day long, but if the information doesn't back it up, then you're not going to ultimately be successful. And so we see that historically that information has not been accessible. And so we're in the process of building out those data sets, so that when a company says, hey, I want to come here, but I need to know about the workforce, or I need to know about the real estate offerings, that there is a more robust suite of information so that they can make quality decisions. So one is, we're bringing in experts that do this. Number two is that we're providing information. Number three is that we hold companies' hands. So as they decide that they want to move here, it's not, oh, how do I set up on an island, and we give them a bunch of information and then they're off on their own. We actually are partners in this process of helping them get set up on the island, everything from real estate to workers to navigating the incentives process. Our team goes hand in hand with them. And then I think, the next phase of this, and this is a big part of it, having these kinds of conversations, whether they're webinars or other things, we've got to be very loud in telling our story, because it's a great story to tell. And quite frankly, the narrative that's out there right now is, unfortunately, grossly misinformed. And so every chance that I have to tell the Puerto Rican story, I'm going to tell it, because it's a beautiful story.
Plus, I think, Rodrick, I think one of the opportunities are to really kind of look at the communities of Puerto Ricans, right? Because who can tell the story better, right? And maybe leverage those networks to be able to, share the story of success, which is what we're talking about, right?
Well, it's funny you say that. I say Puerto Ricans will find Puerto Ricans, no matter where they are in the world. And I've also found that, someone can be out of Puerto Rico for 40, 45, 50 years, and you ask them where they're from, they're going to say Puerto Rico every time. So, we've been aggressive about creating relationships. I think I'm in the Puerto Rican Club of Dallas on Facebook. I mean, there are all of these Puerto Rican affinity groups, and Invest Puerto Rico, we're being strategic, but we're also being intentional and trying to figure out how do we build relationships with these groups so that we can help them, so that we can tell our story through them, and they can tell the story for us. In many cases, what we're finding when we reach out to these groups is they say, "Oh, we're so glad you're here. We've never had an organization that we felt was non-political, because we're completely non-political. We've never had an organization that was non-political and that was consistent. And so we really aim to be non-political, consistent, and actually provide voice to those Puerto Ricans in helping us tell the story."
Yeah, plus I think as a media person, that's my background. I think about the company you just talked about, the AI company, artificial intelligence company. That's the story, right? Those are the stories that need to be out there, so you can get that sense of orgullo, right?
Exactly. I mean, one of the things we do, so for example, there's not a strong history of doing this, and this isn't particularly novel. I'd love to pretend I made it up, but this is something that economic development agencies do around the country, is a couple of times a year, we're going to bring 7 to 10 companies to the island, not for a conference. It's going to be 2 or 3 days of intensive getting to know the island. I find that tends to be way more successful than just going to conferences and trade shows, because it gives these companies and these decision makers an opportunity to meet these companies that are doing great things that they might want to be partnered with. It gives them a chance to meet the HR directors, and it gives them a chance to experience the island in the way that they would if they were living here. And if they had brought their business here. So we're trying to find all the ways that we can engage companies and decision makers to actually get them to touch, see, taste, feel, hear what Puerto Rico is. And we believe that if we're able to do that successfully, they will make the decision to expand to the island.
No, I agree with you. I am in Boston, where I'm currently at. The mayors around here, as well as the mayors throughout the nation, do a city to city tour, right? So they go from one city to the other city, food, again with the flag food and fun, but that they do that, and they go around from neighborhood to neighborhood. They talk about the advantages of each neighborhood, right? And they talk about the opportunities, the economic opportunities for a company, for an individual. And they invite business owners, and they invite potential entrepreneurs or people that are leaders in the industry.
That's absolutely right. I mean, so one of the things is, we aim to do these familiarization tours. We also send out information on a regular basis to site selectors and corporate CEOs about what's happening in the Puerto Rican economy. We actually just finished a perception survey of 500 CEOs in the mainland U.S. to understand what their thoughts were about Puerto Rico as a location for investment. So those are the kinds of things, and we'll be sharing the results of that survey soon. But those are the things that we're finding. We've got to create these touch points that haven't necessarily existed, and we can do that on a very high touch level as it relates to individual companies of scale. But to kind of mass produce that, we're really revamping our website. We've got another website called Puerto Rico Sigue, PuertoRicoSigue.org, and Puerto Rico Sigue shares stories of resilience, as well as tips around business continuity and post-COVID, post-earthquake, those sorts of things. So we're trying to leverage every channel that we can in order to have the robust conversation about why Puerto Rico matters.
I'm going to take a side break. We have a question from Adelaide. She says, Rodrick, thank you for your time. I live in Puerto Rico now. It's the culture we need to embrace to tell your story truthfully, empathetically, and become a part of the secret sauce. Totally agree.
Absolutely. So one of the things, and she's probably going to laugh when she hears this, but when Yo no soy boricua, pero yo tengo alma boricua. I'm not Puerto Rican, but my spirit, my soul is Puerto Rican. And one of the things that I try to do when we bring companies here is to do chinchorreo. And for those who don't know what chinchorreo is, you get a bunch of your friends or you get on a party bus, but you basically take the day and you drive across the island, eating and drinking and having fun and experiencing Puerto Rico. To me, that's what Puerto Rico is all about. And for companies that want to be progressive, I think they will soak in the beauty of the culture of Puerto Rico. That is our biggest selling point. So I thank her for that comment, because it's absolutely essential. And what I say is that if a company's too fuddy-duddy, they probably don't fit here, because part of the culture here is that you have to know how to relax, but you also have to know how to get things done. And that's part of the beauty of what I think, to me, that's what Puerto Rico is all about, being able to balance this idea of being productive with the idea of also valuing those things that are important. One of the things that I've enjoyed about being here is that, I'm a family man and I have 3 children, and I enjoy that I don't do dinners every night of the week, because other people value their family time as well as I do mine. So I know that most nights of the week I can come home to my family. Those are parts of what we have to tell about Puerto Rico. But the flip side of that is there is not enough of the narrative told that there are actually companies here that are very successful companies that are doing very well. There's a workforce here that's not lazy. There's a workforce here that's actually more productive than workforces in many other places. And so we have to figure out, how do we marry that story of productivity, of innovation, of this can-do-it attitude with the beauty of chinchorreo, reggaeton, and all of the other things, salsa merengue, that Puerto Rico brings to the table.
Right, and in terms of the family in Puerto Rico, it's really intergenerational, because when you go chinchorreando, you go with your grandmother, you go with your mom, you go with your kids. It's really intergenerational, which you don't see in a lot of different places.
Absolutely, that's very intergenerational. Or, I love going to the La Placita de Santurce, and I go there, and I love to see the 70-year-old men, the way they dance, and the 18-year-old girls twirling around. And I mean, it's part of the beauty of what makes Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico. Or I'll go to Yunque, and I'll see the families doing the asopao on the side of the river. That is uniquely Puerto Rican, and it's part of what I think has not been elevated in the business discussion. People think about Puerto Rico as a tourist destination. People think about Puerto Rico as a place, well, it would be cool, to visit. But the reality of the lifestyle of Puerto Rico is also a lifestyle that allows for one to be successful both in business as well as their personal lives in a way that it might not be possible in other places.
Rodrick, we talked about a lot of the different, what was that?
Rod is fine, no problem.
Well, you did tell me to call you that when we were talking over the phone, so how about agriculture? What does that look like in Puerto Rico? Because let me just share my story. I love coffee, and I go to Puerto Rico to buy my coffee. So I go and send a whole bunch of products to Boston, where I live. My sister as well. We're huge coffee drinkers. Blue sky, I would love to have a coffee place, right? That's an industry that I don't really hear about.
So I will share a couple of thoughts, and bear with me. Hopefully this is helpful. There has, specifically, well, I'll answer your specific question in just a second. One of the things that Puerto Rico did was probably, and this is probably 40 or 50 years ago, there was a decision made to move away from agriculture, to move to the industrial age, to move more towards farming. Move more towards manufacturing, away from farming and more towards manufacturing. There are a variety of reasons in terms of cost, in terms of industrialization, trying to up wages, those sorts of things for that decision. At this point, though, there is a recognition that that probably wasn't the wisest of decisions, because at this point, there's only about 2% of the economy that's agricultural. that's something that we're trying to change for a few reasons. One is it's a food security issue. Of course, we want to have enough food to support the island. The other piece of that is that Puerto Rico actually has 8 microclimates and 35 by 100 square miles. So what that means is that there are a lot of different options in terms of what can be grown here. There's also a lot of opportunities for environmental technologies and that sorts of things to be tested here. 1 mile off the, less than 1 mile off the West Coast, there is one of the deepest places in the Atlantic Ocean. So we're actually seeing opportunities to, and there's a pilot project to do a 500 megawatt plant leveraging the ocean for energy. We're seeing all of those things. As it relates specifically to coffee, though, I think it's interesting to note that in the last 5 to 7 years, there's been a huge boom in the coffee industry here in Puerto Rico, and the younger generations are starting to learn it and take over it. Before I moved to Puerto Rico, I did not know about Puerto Rican coffee, and I am not a coffee drinker, but this is the best coffee I have ever had. I've had Colombian coffee, I've had coffee out of Arabic coffee, those sorts of things, but Puerto Rican coffee is world class. So we're seeing now a shift, I think, to reevaluating how do we actually start to scale these coffee businesses. We're also seeing a lot of interest in hemp and the cannabis industry here on the island. So I think there's going to be a significant boom in the agricultural sector over the next, 3 to 5 years.
When I worked at Cargill many moons ago, one of my clients was in Trinidad, and we did a lot of work in Trinidad and in Colombia. And they often talked about the quality of the beans, the Puerto Rican coffee beans, but they didn't make enough to trade in the world market. So that always struck me as very interesting, because you're right, it was around 40 years ago that shift happened.
Yeah, so Mayahuez has a program, a strong agricultural program. There are groups like Comprometidos that are doing things with farmers. So what we're seeing is that there is a recognition, and I think the challenges of COVID-19 actually elevate the recognition of the need for a stronger agricultural base here on the island. So there's a lot of excitement and momentum in that direction.
So are you targeting a specific group of businesses? I know you talked about manufacturing, but that's what it's currently there. Do you have a specific group that you'd like to see more in the island?
So our targeted sectors, which we're being the most aggressive about selling, are IT and software,
Which you said,
financial services,
the professional
service, business services, and creative industries. And so those 5 areas are the ones where we're being most aggressive. And let me tell you what the profile is. We work with businesses of all sizes. So it's not we just work with small businesses or just big businesses. We work with businesses of all sizes. However, the profile of the average business that we're working with is probably somewhere between what they're looking to do and bring to the island is probably somewhere around 20 to 50 employees. Because what we find is that the speed to making a decision is pretty quick for companies that are doing deals that size. What we also find with companies of that size is that it's a faster decision for them, but it's also a bigger decision for them. And so the idea of once they make that move, they kind of dig in their heels and they're not going anywhere. And so we really think that that's a sweet spot if we can find companies in those sectors. And a couple of interesting things about those sectors. Well, one is, of course, the tax break, which is if you're exporting a service or good off the island, the income tax for the business, corporate income tax drops to 4%. So that's one of the things that makes that particularly attractive for those kinds of business.
Before you go on, can you walk me through what some of those successful companies look like right now?
Yes, absolutely. So a few of the successful companies, so we've got some insurance companies that have come to the island. There's a group called PRIA, the Puerto Rico Insurance Association, and PRIBA, the Puerto Rico International Business Association. We've got 2 or 3 companies in there that came to the island maybe 2-3 years ago that are now, 300 plus employees on the island. So those are examples of companies. Another example is a company that we supported called Arrival. Arrival is an international bank that came here The founders are from the mainland, but they were running a financial entity in Singapore, and they realized that they could do it from Puerto Rico, run a similar type of organization from Puerto Rico, and be closer to home. So they brought that company here. There is another group called Solaris Capital, which we work closely with, which is a group that finds alternative forms of financing for emerging for businesses. And so we've got a lot of those kinds of businesses that are saying, oh yeah, Puerto Rico makes a lot of sense for us to be here. And they get up and they get running fairly quickly, and they're having a lot of success.
And when you talk about exporting, are you primarily speaking on products or services or both?
We're speaking about both. We're speaking about both. We're speaking about both, and that incentive actually applies to both products as well as services if you're exporting anything. From a manufacturing perspective, I think this is important to note. From a manufacturing perspective, part of the reason why we hadn't focused on manufacturing as a core part of our selling was because it was so well established on the island and it had already hit critical mass. And we knew that the trend, and when I say the trend, I mean 3 months ago, was that less manufacturing was happening in North America. More of it was moving far west or far east. And so with that perspective, we said, we've got a base there, we want to preserve it. But what we see now is that we think that a lot of those companies that are in India and that are in China are going to really be looking for opportunities either on the mainland or close to the mainland. And we think Puerto Rico offers a good alternative to that. So we're going to be very aggressive and bullish in selling to them.
Super. Well, Rodrick, thank you so much for being part of the conversation. I, of course, want to know more. Your website is?
Yeah, so we have two websites. One of them is www.investpr.org. That's www.investpr.org. That is our main website where we share a lot of the information about businesses and how to move to the island and that sort of thing. The other website that we take advantage of is www.puertoricosigue.org or maybe .com, puertoricosigue.com, and which Puerto Rico continues. And that is our website for business continuity and to tell the stories of resilience.
Okay, super. I just put those on the chat.
It's not, the Puerto Rico Sigue isn't quite right. I'm going to fix it.
Thank you for that.
No worries.
Ah, there it goes, of course.
No worries.
I miss that Rico.
Yeah, yes, indeed. No hay problema. So, so we're excited to, to develop a relationship with you, and feel free to have me on anytime, or other members of our team. We can talk about what's happening on the island from the perspective of resilience, and how companies are being resilient, and how we see companies retooling themselves. For example, like the cerveceria and the rum distilleries that have now gone to producing sanitizer. We can talk about stories like that. We can share stories of the entrepreneurs here. There are a lot of great stories we can share.
I love the idea of the entrepreneurs. I think sometimes we are thinking about what comes next. At least I am, right? And I know a number of the people that are on here right now are thinking about what types of opportunities may be there for them. And so hearing about other people's success stories allows you to possibly think about what you can do yourself. But I'm particularly intrigued by the data information, that once you are able to compile the CEO's feedbacks, I'd love to bring you back to talk about that. So those are two invitations to talk about entrepreneurs, the success stories, and the one I of course, I'm a data person. I would love to know what some of those data points are.
Well, I look forward to coming back. I'll share a couple of just closing thoughts, if that's okay.
But before you do, let me just tell you what we just have one more thing. FinTech is growing here. Additionally, those afforded tax incentives at 60 must make an annual donation. Consider a nonprofit to begin a program for youth entrepreneurs. Love that. These are the voices driving the island. The changes they are seeking is impressive, inspiring, and certainly a change in leading. Those are the frontiers, just a thought. Additionally, as the Thunderbird Global Management Master's candidate, thank you for speaking of a global presence in Puerto Rico. Stay safe and healthy, team. And again, that was Adelaide.
I thank her for those comments. You know, and I'm a big fan of Thunderbird. I was in Phoenix, the Phoenix region, for a number of years and was actively involved with Thunderbird. You know, to the point that she's mentioned, there's a lot of great stuff happening in terms of entrepreneurial training on the island. There's a group called Echa Palante, which is an initiative of Banco Popular, which basically has gone to teach, has focused on teaching and training entrepreneurship and taking it throughout the entire school system. I think that's one of the amazing initiatives that's happening on the island. Of course, Orlando Bravo, who is a billionaire hedge fund out of San Francisco, but from Puerto Rico, has launched a major initiative with entrepreneurs on the west side of the island, the western side of the island, to help them be optimally successful. And then, of course, there is Forward 787, which is an initiative led by Rick Elias of Red Ventures, another Puerto Rican billionaire out of Charlotte, where he takes, you know, Puerto Rican, you know, rising talent, and they go work for a year or two in his company, and then he sets them up on island, running different small businesses, startup businesses and stuff. So one of the things that I've seen everywhere that I've gone is that the recovery, not just the economic recovery, but the recovery, revitalization, and the new story is really going to be led by entrepreneurs. It's going to be led by entrepreneurs, and it's going to be led by young people. The reality is that young people tend to be the ones willing to take the risk, and in many cases, they have the progressive ideas. And what I've been telling all of my friends who have, you know, children that are under the age of 30 is that they should move to Puerto Rico, because it's a place where, as a young professional or an entrepreneur, someone making the choice to move here actually matters. I think, you know, no offense to Boston or New York or Silicon Valley, but one more entrepreneur there is one more entrepreneur there. One more entrepreneur here is really changing the narrative and changing the future for the island. And so we really want to, you know, take advantage of all of that energy and figure out how do we harness it to make Puerto Rico an even better place with an even brighter future.
Well, I am there with you 100%. You can count on my support. It looks like we have one more question. What is the name of the investing website that Rod mentioned a few minutes ago? And that's from Aisha.
Yeah, so there is, what I'm talking about is Echa Palante. That's actually a site that it's actually an initiative that trains entrepreneurs in the K through 12 system. But there is also, of course, our Invest Puerto Rico site, as well as the Puerto Rico SIGA site. But to the question that she's answering more directly, one of the things is we've got an opportunity zone. 95% of the island is an opportunity zone, which offers incredible, you know, tax breaks. And we've got a lot of investors that come in, and the first thing that they ask us is, what can we invest in? And one of the initiatives that we're doing as we try to compile all of this information is to figure out what are the projects that are turnkey or that really offer the ability for people to be able to invest. So we're going to continue trying to figure out how to help, you know, tie these pieces together so that when people are looking for a turnkey investment or an opportunity to invest in a business or real estate development, that there's a source that they can go to.
Super. Rod, if you want to send me some of that information, I can go ahead and distribute to the folks that are currently on here. Let me just make sure we answered all the questions. So if you want to send me all that information, I will share it with the folks that signed in to the program. Thank
you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can do it in person one of these days.
Exactly. I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you. Please be safe.
Bye-bye. You too.